morning, good morning. Hi, everybody. Welcome on this rather dreary day, but I guess that's kind of Scottish, isn't it? So we need to keep smiles on our faces. Thanks, everybody, for coming. What a great crowd. My name is Katie Murphy. I'm president of North Yarmouth Historical Society, and we are really excited to be partnering today with the Maine Ulster-Scots Project. This is something that I really don't know anything about, and I'm Irish. Just wanted to say that, right? So John Mann is really going to give us a great presentation and overview. A few housekeeping pieces of information. First of all, I think you probably all know that the restrooms are right out the door and a little to the left. And we will be taping this program, and it will be mounted through Yarmouth Cable TV, thanks to Sean Quirk in the background, the techie guy. We love him. Thank you. Yeah. And remember, this is like part one of the events of today. We are here starting at 11:30, probably going to about 12:30 or so, maybe a little bit before. And then at 1:30, we will be over at Old Town House, which is right around the corner. And I believe, oh, there's a map. How great is this? And at 1:30, we will be opening our doors there for a pop-up exhibit of some really fun things to look at, some new discoveries we have from our own collection here in North Yarmouth, and other things from the Patriots Historical Society, the Harpswell Historical Society. Really fun things to really put some frosting on the cake to this presentation and to find out more about the interesting history of the Ulster-Scots here in Maine. Becky Miller is here, who's president of, I keep wanting to say MUSP, Maine Ulster-Scots Project, MUSP. And she'll be introducing John. And one other thing is, if you are looking for, in between the presentation and 1:30, if you want some place to go for some snacks or a light lunch, I have a few of these that, if you're from out of town, that tell a little bit about some things around here that you may want to stop into before you get over to Old Town House for our 1:30 program, although we will have refreshments there. So, without further ado. Thanks, Becky.
Okay, my name's Becky. I'm the president of the Maine Ulster-Scots Project. I met up with these folks about 6-7 years ago, and I've just been so fascinated with what they know, and there's so much history out there. And this is a wonderful opportunity to hear John. So some of you may already know John, but if not, it's my honor to introduce him. He grew up in Freeport and was a land surveyor for about 45 years. He has a unique knowledge and understanding of how humans are connected to and how they settled the land. And he sees the land as our heritage, a source of identity, and how we are connected to our ancestors through the land. John's family lived in the Flying Point area of Freeport for many generations, and before Freeport became a town in 1789, it was part of North Yarmouth. John grew up with many family stories about the Ulster-Scots who settled in this area in the early 1700s. But when he realized that nobody seemed to be telling the story of these settlers, he founded the Maine Ulster-Scots Project in 2006 with a couple of friends in order to tell those stories. Since I've gotten to know him, I can tell you he has many, many stories and is a wealth of information about local ancestry and settlement in this area. So as we Americans celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Revolutionary War, he will be telling you one of those many, many stories about a local Revolutionary War patriot, Thomas Means. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Becky. You're welcome. And thank you to all the volunteers, North Yarmouth, Harpswell, Patriots, all cooperating to put this program together today. It's really quite an event, and it's a little bit intimidating after all of the introductions, to come up here and try to keep your attention for an hour, but we'll do the best we can. We labeled this program Scots-Irish Presbyterian Revolution, and we didn't make that up. That term was coined by a Hessian captain fighting on behalf of the British, who told a friend in Germany in 1778, "Call this war, dearest friend, by whatsoever name you may, only call it not an American Revolution. It is nothing more or less than an Irish-Scotch Presbyterian rebellion." How many of us remember that? How well has that story been brought down from the time of the American Revolution to now? It's been lost. Well, we're bringing it back. In 2000, I took my father on a little trip to Scotland. And as we flew in to the airport outside of Glasgow, the sun was just coming up. And the tops of the hills and the borders were alight with light from the morning light. And the valleys were in shadow. And my heart went, whoop. I knew I'd come home. I didn't know I'd left, but I knew I'd come back. And I emailed my wife that night and said, "I'm changed. I don't know what it means yet, but I'm warning you." So we founded the Maine Ulster-Scots Project in 2006, and its mission is to gather and save the stories of Maine's Ulster-Scots families and to periodically publish and otherwise share that information with the public, and importantly with Maine students. By showing up here today, already a gentleman has approached me with a 12-page family story. This has been going on ever since I started the project. We have now documented over 200 families that have come to Maine. From the Ulster connection. We're going to try to talk about that a little bit. They go by many names and they go by no name. Many people have no name at all for this group. But if they are called anything, they're called the Other Irish, or the Scotch-Irish, or the Scots-Irish, or if you're down in Georgia, they might call you a cracker. Anywhere in the country, they might call you a redneck, or a hillbilly, or a billy boy, or God's frontiersman, or the people with no name. But either, whatever you call us, we don't really give a damn. Over 30 million Americans descend from this group of people. And Maine has the highest percentage of self-proclaimed Scottish heritage people in America per US Census. But you don't hear about it, do you? Well, you're going to hear about it. Let's first talk about the reputation. This is from a book by Winthrop Sargent in his introduction to the memoirs of the Journal of the Braddock Expedition. And he says, "They were a hardy, brave, hot-headed race, excitable in temper, unrestrainable in passion, invincible in prejudice. Their hand opened as impetuously to a friend as it clenched against a foe, impatient of restraint, rebellious against everything that in their eyes bore the semblance of injustice. We find these men the readiest among the ready on the battlefields of the Revolution. If they had faults, a lack of patriotism or courage was not among the number." That was a reputation during the American Revolutionary War. Where does that come from? Where does that grit and determination come from? Let's go back to the Declaration of Arbroath, which I want you to remember as we do this talk, dated April 6, 1320. 1320, okay? We talk about cultural aspects to a group of people being carried forward through time. For so long as 100 remain alive, we will never in any degree be subject to the dominion of the English. since not for glory, riches, or honors do we fight, but for freedom alone, which no man loses but with his life. Scottish culture, my friends. Bring that into New England and take a look at the reputation that was built. This is listed in a book by Reverend Parker, who wrote the history of Londonderry, New Hampshire. The Londonderry people came on the same boat as the Maine people and split off in Falmouth. So we're talking about the same group of people. Parker wrote in his book, the national traits which characterized this company of emigrants were deeply and strongly marked. Although they came from Ireland, they retained unmixed the national Scotch character. The Scotch as a nation are plain, frugal, frank, and somewhat rough. The next remarkable feature has been courage. As a people, they have never shrunk from peril. So it was with the Indian and French wars. So it was after the news of the Battle of Lexington. So we see a progression. Another prominent trait was their ready wit. No subject was kept sacred from it. The thoughtless and the grave, the old and the young alike enjoyed it. A grotesque yet serious pathos, strangeness about them. It was the Scotch Covenanter, softened by a century's residence abroad, amid persecution and trial, and then grown wild in the woods of New England. The disposition to humor, rioting, and laughter was only on the surface, while the strong granite features of Scotland were fixed deep in the soul. They were a devout religious people with Presbyterian predilections, confirmed in inhuman massacres, extortions, and wars. So we go back to the opening statement, a Presbyterian Scots-Irish revolution. There's the basis and the foundation for it. One more piece of reputation. This is a monument in Larne, the port city of Northern Ireland, which I stumbled along to when I was looking for a place to buy a sandwich. How does this reputation relate to the American Revolutionary War, North Yarmouth, and in particular the Means family, the Armstrong family of the Means massacre story? This, at the base of this monument, showing a man, a woman, and a child, the woman carrying a Bible, the boy carrying a sack of potatoes. Okay? It says, there is no other race in the United States that can produce a roll of honor so long and so shining with distinction, and who shall deny our claim to have done more, much more, than any other to make the United States. Now, whether that's true or not, the people that put up this monument thought it was, and they're the root source from whence these people came. So how did this all come about? In 1697, 200,000 people departed the fertile soils of lowland, 1608 to 1607, excuse me. 200,000 people departed the fertile soil of lowland Scotland and crossed the North Channel to Northern Ireland. There they found productive farmland and took advantage of it. They bred livestock, cultivated crops, and developed flourishing textile industry, the linen flax industry. Ulster promised to be a haven of free worship for Presbyterians who outnumbered the English 6-1, but they did not live happily ever after in their new adopted homeland. Up in the corner of that image, you see King James the First and the Sixth. It was one of his pet projects to start the plantation in the north of Ireland. And you notice the date, 1607. Most of you will recall that Jamestown was started in 1607 in Virginia. Same king, same methodology, same idea in mind. Scotland, however, is made up of three dominant different cultures. You have the Highland clans, you have the lowlands with a monarchical society divided into political districts, and you have the borders, which were a culture unto themselves. The borderlands between Scotland and England were controlled by the clans that lived there and were a law unto themselves, until the Union of the Crown in 1603, made raiding across the borders unusable because there was the same monarchy on both sides of the border. Well, they used to be able to swatch sides whatever they wanted to. It became problematic. So many of the people that ended up on the coast of Maine came from these three cultures, and while the lowlands is often referred to as the dominant culture coming into Ulster, the fact of the matter is all three cultures came in, and we can trace them here to the coast of Maine in the 18th century. Let's talk about the reivers on the border a little bit. There were scores of reiving families in the Scottish-English border region. Only 17 families on the Scottish side were officially deemed clan, and they were singled out by the Scottish Parliament in 1587 by special statute. With this law passed, all members of a surname became collectively answerable for the crimes of his or her kin. You want to build some strong family ties? Try throwing that statute around. In addition to the clan chiefs were made responsible for the crimes of all those under their care. All clan chiefs, nobles, barons, and clans were listed and accountable to the crown. Well, good luck with that. At least according to the authorities. Those listed below were subject to the statute. Number one on the list is Armstrong. We're going to be talking today about Robert Armstrong and Jean Armstrong and their union and what they brought to the state of Maine. Robert Means and Jean Armstrong. So there's the background on the Armstrong family a little bit, but let me give you a little more. The Armstrong could put 3,000 men in the saddle on 48 hours' notice. A sizable force well-versed in guerrilla warfare. This is a picture of the Armstrong Cemetery in the rolling hills of the borders that I took back in around 2003. Beside the road, as you go through the borderlands, you come upon this statue, and it says 1606, Lang Sandy Armstrong and his 11 sons were executed at this spot for murdering a government official. Notice the date, 3 years after the Union of the Crowns. Reiving in the borderlands was not much fun after that. So, you have Robert Means and you have Jean Armstrong coming into Falmouth Harbor in Maine in 1718. Clan Menzies, when I went into the lowlands and we were looking at the Armstrong borderlands, we discovered in a little town called Langholm a museum, just a little museum made just for the Armstrong clan. And Val and I walked in, we were the only two people there except the curator. And she was curious, where are you from? Who are your family? I said, well, we trace our family back to the Robert Means and Jean Armstrong. And she smiled. She says, you know, the Armstrongs and the Means were an old alliance. They looked after each other's back. One was Highland, one was Reiver, but they made an alliance, as you did in those days. And she was not surprised that a Means and an Armstrong traveled to the New World. She said, you understand, though, that the Means family is a Gaelic family, and the name is pronounced Menzies. Menzies with a G. So I learned a little bit there. But I also learned in reading the history of the borders that many of the border reivers settled in one location in Ulster that was near Enniskillen. The border reivers were Catholic by name, but they were not Catholic by practice. They didn't have a practice. There's a story of a traveler going through the borderlands between England and Scotland during the Reiver period who said, why is it in all these little towns I find no churches? Are there no Christians here? And the answer came, no, we're all Armstrongs and Elliots. So what happens in Enniskillen in 1689? During the Williamite Wars, it was attacked and put under siege. But the local Reiver families that occupied the territory held off the siege and stopped it. King William's army moved on to Derry and laid siege to Londonderry. And you'll read in chapter 1 of the posters up here that 15,000 people in Londonderry during the siege died of starvation. They were eating rats, they were eating everything they could put their hands on, but it was not enough to keep them going. But did they give out? No, they held on. No surrender. What we have, we hold, is the motto of these people. So how does that relate to America? Well, there's a direct relationship, as you'll see. James Logan, the Secretary of State for Colony of Pennsylvania, as listed in How the Scots Invented the Modern World and Everything in It. Quote, "We were apprehensive from the northern Indians. I therefore thought it might be prudent to plan a settlement of such men as those who formerly had so bravely defended Londonderry and Enniskillen as a frontier in case of any disturbance." So you have Philadelphia sitting there, and people are coming in and moving out to the west and to the south and starting down the Great Wagon Road. And the Indians were raising the dickens, as you might imagine they would. Most of the people that had come so far and taken that route were Quakers. They weren't much protection for Philadelphia. James Logan wanted protection for Philadelphia. He sent for the Ulster-Scots. One of the reasons he did so was because of the model that had taken place in Maine. Under Cotton Mather's plan of 1706, Mather wrote to England and Scotland, to the ministers there, to procure good Scotch colonies and settle hardy families on the frontiers of Maine and New Hampshire, to protect the towns and churches of Massachusetts from the French and Indians. Okay? The Enniskillen model, Londonderry model, the Maine, New Hampshire model led to the model for Pennsylvania. Bring in the Scots-Irish and settle them on the frontiers, and that'll keep the Indians off our back. The first one in Maine that we've found to take advantage of that so far was Archibald McPheeters, who lived in Portsmouth. And he wrote to he was a sea captain in a maritime merchant, very successful. And he wrote to his sea captains that were trading in Ireland, in Northern Ireland, to bring back good farmers, servants, and fishermen. These people settled in the area around Biddeford and Saco on the Saco River. Okay? You may say, what's that got to do with North Yarmouth, but we'll get to that. The next group came in on the brig Robert, into Falmouth Harbor, and on that ship was Robert Means and Jean Armstrong, and many other local families from the Falmouth and South area. And the third group was Robert Temple, who developed a plan with the proprietors around the Kennebec River to bring settlers for their land in return for him receiving land himself at the Chops between the Merrymeeting Bay and the Kennebec River. Okay, so you have three groups simultaneously coming right up the coast of Maine, and that continued, by the way, into further years, going further east all the way into Washington County, until the whole coast of Maine was settled with over 30 communities of Scots-Irish prior to the American Revolution. Now, didn't you study that in 8th grade? Oh, they forgot to mention it. Maine history is written from the Massachusetts point of view. We're here to fix that. A mass population of lowland Scots and border English relocated to the north of Ireland starting early in the 1600s, and then a significant migration of Ulster-Scots to Maine and New England started in 1718 and continued through 1764. There had been a trickle before that, but the bulk of it came in that time period. Robert Means was actually either born or moved to Maryland as a child, and his father died there, and he moved with his mother to Pennsylvania, and she died there. He came back to Ulster when he was age 14, to Enniskillen, hooked up with Jean Armstrong and came back to America in 1718. History is always more complicated than you think. So through exile, purchase, settlement, conflict, resistance, sweat equity, and harassment, the Scots and Ulster-Scots established the coastal boundaries of Maine by providing the human occupation required to create defendable title to their new homeland. Who was it that wanted defendable title? It was the proprietors of Massachusetts that had claimed the ownership of the land in Maine, but it was the Scots that they brought in that made it work, because without occupation, the title was always challengeable in court. So let's talk about Robert Means and Jane Armstrong. I got a picture here of Penelope Mann, who was a great-granddaughter of Jane at age 90. Picture was taken in 1902 at Flying Point, about a quarter of a mile from your house, Heather. She had 11 children. She lived to be 100. You think this woman had grit? Jane Armstrong Means had 11 children and 89 grandchildren. I stopped counting great-grandchildren because it was getting too time-consuming. I call her the matriarch of Casco Bay. Because by the time you get to the third generation of Jane's offspring, you've got families living all over Casco Bay and moving inland at a rapid rate. The North Yarmouth connection, that's why you're here, right? Had to give you a little background, though. The North Yarmouth connection, there's a picture of the original settlement plotting plan for North Yarmouth, which over time got busted up into 5 or 6 different towns. And in the lower right-hand corner, in pink, I have highlighted an area that the Ulster-Scots dominated. Every family in that zone were Ulster-Scots. The Flying Point Dummerclaim area, which went from the Burnett Road, Little River, around Flying Point and all the way to Bunganuck and Brunswick. And by the way, once you crossed the line into Brunswick, it was continued to be Ulster-Scots all the way around the coast and up to the fort on the Androscoggin. And by the way, if you're going to cross the river at the fort into Topsham, you'd find that that was all Ulster-Scots as well in that early time period. Chip Griffin wrote, until 1760, Ulster-Scot was the dominant European population for the coast of Maine. What happened in 1760s? Indian Wars ended. Ulster-Scots were no longer needed. Massachusetts people flooded into the state of Maine, and we lost our dominant status, but we didn't forget. There's an original lotting plan for the Dummerclaim at Flying Point, and these are the families that took up residence. James Anderson, Jacob Anderson, Gideon Mann, John Mann, Thomas Means, and Matthew Patton, Actor Patton, John Ray, David Wentworth, Daniel Chase, Samuel Chase, Solomon Williams, Gideon Mann, James Dunning, Benjamin Chase, all with Ulster-Scots connections, and most of them, not all of them, but most of them related to or descended from Jane Armstrong. Reivers. Thomas Means and his family. Thomas was a son of Robert and Jane. First went up the Merrymeeting River, Kennebec River into Merrymeeting Bay, and established a partnership with the Patton family. The Patton family became the biggest shipbuilding family on the Kennebec River in that time period, from which the Patton Free Library that we know and love today is established. Thomas's sister Mary married John Patton. I mean, this goes on and on. His daughter married the Schofields. One of their tribe married into the George Rogers family. And what I'm trying to tell you is they were the biggest shipbuilding extended family in the state of Maine in that time period. They were all interrelated, and they were all building ships and sailing ships and building a vertical monopoly from owning the land, owning the timber, building the ships and sailing them around the world and doing the merchants marine operation in that time period. If you throw a brick in any direction, you'd hit an Ulster-Scot building a ship. So Thomas Means and his wife, Alice Finney, and their family cleared 7 acres on Flying Point and built a log home. And they had come there from Merrymeeting Bay to get away from the threat of the Indians during the French and Indian War. How ironic. Their little family became the subject of the Means Massacre, which was one of Maine's most famous tales during the French and Indian War period. We did a reenactment in 2006. After losing her husband, her baby, and her sister, Alice Means moved her remaining family into Jacob Anderson's blockhouse or garrison, where Thomas Means II, who is the subject of this talk, we're finally getting to that, Thomas Means II was born 7 months later. All right. So Agnes Finney was Alice Finney's older sister. Jacob Anderson married Agnes. Thomas Means married Alice. They lived a mile apart on Flying Point, and they were there because they were close to the garrison that Jacob built. Jacob had a reputation as an Indian fighter. They felt safer there than they did on the Kennebec River, which had such a terrible history of Indian troubles in the past. And on May the 10th of 1756, just before sunrise in the morning, the log home was attacked. The front door was knocked in, and Alice's sister Molly was taken captive. Little Alice was taken, but later was able to escape. Little Robert was killed, and Alice carried the bullet in her breast the rest of her life. Thomas was dragged from the house 10 rods down towards the shore and scalped and shot. After pleading for his life, asking to be taken prisoner instead of being killed, they said, "No, you're too big and we don't trust you. You'll stay here and we'll take the girls." So we've had the privilege at the Maine Ulster-Scots Project to have access to the area where that home was built. And we have found evidence of their occupation. In fact, we found the spot where the log home was set and all of the debris from the residential use of that time period around it. And then downslope just a little ways, we found where they were actually in the process of building a bigger home. What you're seeing in this image is a clay pad indented with divots from where the base of the chimney was set for the second home. Not having concrete in those days, they used marine clay as a concrete substitute. So they dug the hole for the foundation, they put in a wet clay pad, let it harden up, and then built a chimney on it. Also in that same building, we find stone pillars being built, this hole dug in the ground like you would a sonotube, filled with stones and packed clay up to make a foundation post for the support of the new house that was being built. All of which was improvised construction. If there's one thing we've learned about the Ulster-Scots, the term redneck is not wasted. These people improvised with whatever they had to make life work. If all they had was rocks and clay, they made a house out of it. If you want to know more about the details of that family and the massacre, I encourage you to buy edition 2 of our Ulster-Scots on the coast of Maine. So Jacob Anderson built either a blockhouse or a garrison, depending on which historical document you study. If it was a blockhouse, it might have looked something like this. If it was a garrison, it might have looked something like this. The McIntyre garrison is probably the oldest wooden structure still standing in the state of Maine. It was built by Scottish prisoners and the descendants of Scottish prisoners in York around 1700. Interestingly enough, the width of this foundation is 22 feet. And the width of the foundation we're now digging at the Anderson site is 22 feet. We haven't found the other corners yet, so I can't tell you the other dimensions yet. But from the artifacts that we're finding from the time period, we're quite sure that this is in fact Jacob Anderson's home where the Means family moved after the massacre. Other patriots from that time period in the Dummer claim included Thomas Means, as we said, Jacob Anderson, the younger, which was his cousin, George Rogers, which was his stepfather, Isaac Mann, which was his neighbor, and James Means, his cousin from Stroudwater. I'm sure there are many others, but these are the ones that I could pick up on quickly. I call this the re-education of Vincent Woodside, to give you a flavor of the temperament and the high feelings that were going around just prior to the American Revolution, or the Scotch-Irish Presbyterian Rebellion, if you will. There's a story that's documented of the grandson of James Woodside, who was the first minister to come to Brunswick with the Scots-Irish in 1718 on the McCallum, or with the McCallum group. Vincent Woodside ran the sawmill at Bunganuck on the town line between Freeport and Brunswick. He was a king's agent, mast agent, kept track of the king's mast so that the local people wouldn't have the profit of cutting their own trees. Because of his situation and his income flow, undoubtedly influenced him. He was a loyalist. Nobody else in the neighborhood was a loyalist, not even close to it. So they went down to talk to him one day, and they took him on a little ride up to the Freeport corner under an elm tree, which they labeled a Liberty tree. They dug a hole in the ground, just deep enough so they could put Vincent in up to his chin, backfilled it, and left him and said, think about it. He got re-educated. He became a patriot. Thompson's War, when you go to see our other exhibit in the other building after lunch, you'll be able to read this story of Thompson's War. But Thompson's War was basically a group of Scots-Irish from Brunswick who heard that Mowat was in the harbor at Falmouth and threatening to burn the city down. They said to each other, well, let's go down and capture that boat. What the heck, right? It's only the British Navy. If we can get in our little schooners, we'll just go down there and we'll capture them. Well, they got down there and come to find out Captain Mowat was ashore, dickering with the local people in Falmouth about what they were going to do to resolve their differences. So Thompson and his boys from Brunswick, with a sprig of spruce in their cap to denote who they were, captured Mowat and put him in prison. You know, what would a border reaver do? Blackmail. Well, the people of Falmouth went berserko. What the heck are you doing capturing a British captain in our town? This isn't going to go down well. Well, Thompson's boys and the people in Falmouth had disagreement about it. And Mowat said, if you just let me go, I promise. Cross my heart. No problems. We'll just sail away and we'll forget the whole incident. So that's what they did, and Thompson went home and Mowat came back and burned the city down. But I tell you this story not because it has a whole lot to do with Thomas Means, but it does tell you the attitude and the idea and the feeling that was going around in that time period, 1775. Thomas Means the second, and I call him that because he never went by Junior. He didn't go by the second either. He just called himself Thomas Means, and everybody called him Thomas Means because his father was dead, so there's only one of them. There was nothing to be confused about. But if you're a genealogist or a historian, I can tell you it gets downright confusing when you're looking at Thomas Means Jr. and it turns out to be Thomas Means III. But nonetheless, we sorted that out. He joins his father-in-law, his stepfather rather, George Rogers, who was remarried his mother after the massacre. And they started off in the 3rd North Yarmouth Company, building fortifications in Portland to protect Portland from anything that may happen during the dispute with the British. But he goes on to have a very stellar war record on top of that. And I'm going to read to you, I hate reading, but I want to get it right. From the records that were kept by Florence Thurston and the gentleman that wrote 3 Centuries of Freeport, I forget his name now. Harmon Cross. From Harmon Cross's records, the career of Thomas Means II is perhaps a cross-section of the life of a revolutionary forefather, which because of his ancestry and his own deeds is worthy of being recorded here. He first saw the light of day in the garrison house on Flying Point, where his wounded mother had been taken after the Indian attack, which robbed her of her son Robert and her husband, the first Thomas Means. We know nothing of his boyhood, but at age 18 he was a private in Captain George Rogers' company, 3rd North Yarmouth, which company was detached from the 2nd Cumberland County Regiment to work on a fort in Portland Harbor. The following year, he was a matros in Captain Abner Lowell's company, serving until the last of December 1776. On December 6, he enlisted for 3 years in the company of Captain George White, 11th Regiment, Massachusetts Line, under Colonel Ebenezer Francis. Most of these guys were signing up for 9 months, if you could get them to do that. He signed up for 3 years. This regiment was then posted at Ticonderoga and retreated before Burgoyne to Hubbardstown, 22 miles away. July 6, 1777, losing all their baggage and stores. The next day, the regiment fought at the Battle of Hubbardstown and lost their colonel, who was killed leading a charge. After the battle, the soldiers retreated to the mountains of Stillwater, suffering severe losses, and took part in the battle at that place, September 19, 1777, where General Lincoln opposed 2,500 men to Burgoyne's 6,000, inflicting upon the latter a loss of 600 men and winning a victory for the Continentals. They were learning fast, learning curve steep, results good. A month later at Saratoga, Thomas Means saw the surrender of the remnants of Burgoyne's force, doubtless a sweet revenge for the humiliation of the retreat, where 1,000 Americans at Ticonderoga were driven by 8,400 British, who inflicted a loss of 500 upon them. There's a picture of the surrender. But Thomas Means' career goes on. That winter, Corporal Means passed at Valley Forge. Enduring the privations which made this the lowest ebb in the fortunes of the Revolutionary War, here he was but one of 1,008 men said to have been there from the District of Maine. Think about that for a minute. There might have been 30,000 people in the District of Maine at that time. 1,000 of them were at Valley Forge. You think they were committed to the Revolutionary War? I think so. There's a monument, I've got a picture of a monument at Valley Forge to the memory of the 1,008 men that came from the District of Maine. Monmouth. Oh, but before we go there, while at Valley Forge, at the low point of the American Revolution, George Washington wrote a letter to the Continental Congress and said, "This isn't going too good, but if all else fails, I will retreat up the valley of Virginia, plant my flag on the Blue Ridge, rally around the Scotch-Irish of that region, and make my last stand for liberty amongst a people who will never submit to British tyranny while there is a man left to draw a trigger." April 6, 1320. Now at Valley Forge, same words spilling forth about this group of people. Stubborn bunch. So then, and this is really amazing to me. Corporal Means was one of 1,200 hand-picked men under Mad Anthony Wayne, chosen to storm the walls at Stony Point, a fortress on the Hudson River, at night with bayonets only, so the British would not be able to judge the size of the force attacking them. And they took it. Imagine going up that hill and over those walls in the dark with the orders not to fire a shot. And they took the fort. So the service record of Thomas Means II is quite a thing to look at. And it's typical. Harmon Cross said it was typical of the forces of the Ulster-Scots at the time. So there's a poem, the second half of a poem by Robert Ashley Logue from Tennessee that I would like to read to you. From the battle-scarred lowlands of bonny Scotland to the north of the great Emerald Isle, through the Valley Forge winter to sweet Dixieland, Celts have struggled for every mile. Let me never forget that I stand on this ground because Ulster-Scots could not abide the yoke of injustice half the world round and die before a life without pride. Though long years have passed with those blood ties near lost and centuries' amnesiac flood, I remember my freedom was gained at great cost, and that our homelands are stained with one blood. And that circle unbroken still binds us this hour, growing stronger with each passing year. In the fiddles and bagpipes still travels this power. 'Tis the memory of kinship we hear. If you want to know about the work of the Maine Ulster-Scots Project, I encourage you to purchase this book on your way out. It was the 300th anniversary of the 1718 migration, and we did an international symposium at Bowdoin College, and we had people come from as far away as South Africa and New Zealand. Okay? We have not forgot that we are all still cousins. I wrote this little poem for my own family, which I'll end the talk with and then take some questions. Yeah, I've run a little long, but not too bad. I call it an Ulster-Scots journey. At the bleeding edge of endeavor, the borderlands always our home. Passed down from beyond forever our marrow, our blood, and our bone. The passion to lead, not to follow. To strike out for frontiers unknown. Not knowing what challenge tomorrow, but knowing we won't fight alone. We stand with our kinsmen together. We stand fast with those gone before. We fight for the land where they gather. And we'll sleep in their dust by the shore. Thank you. Questions? Any questions? Any discussion? Any ideas? Yeah, in the back.
You said early on that roughly 200,000 Scots came across in the late 1600s. Can you talk a little bit about the reason and what happened?
The reasons were multitude, but the biggest problem to me with the British system was the leadership of the government. You get this monarchical, regal system, and every time you changed the person who was sitting on the throne changed, they had a different opinion of what the religion should be. You go Protestant, you go be Catholic, you go Church of England, you go this way, that way. And the people in Scotland had led strongly in the Protestant Reformation under John Knox. And they had overthrown the priests and the bishops and created a system that was bottom up instead of top down, all right? When they came to New England later, they fit the New England town meeting model perfectly. They wanted local control, and they wanted to be in control, not being told by somebody that lived in Rome or somebody that lived in London what they should say when they got to church on Sunday, or who they should pray to. So anyway, that was going on. But King James, being on the throne, wanted to make sure that there was no counter-revolution against his authority, stemming as a base in Ireland and then gaining strength and then moving to England to overthrow him, okay? The Catholics in the south of Ireland, you had the Protestants in the north of Ireland. He could envision a time when they would build forces in Ireland and then come through Northern Ireland and into England and challenge his right to the throne. So he said, okay, I got this problem in Scotland with these Presbyterians. They won't conform to my edicts on what their religion should be. They came up with this phrase that I'll bend my knee to no man, only Christ is head of the church, which made them traitors. And they were hunted down and executed without trial by the thousands. Okay, it didn't make for happy campers. So when the opportunity came, the king said to the landlords, because Scotland was a pretty feudal system, you had these major landlords, and then they had these cottars that paid rent to the landlord, right? He told the landlords, I'll give you land in the north of Ireland, in Ulster. If you'll take your Protestant people, get them over there, okay, instead of over here. That'll solve two problems at the same time for the king, right? So he assigned land to the landlords, and the landlords brought their tenants. So if you're from that group, you might be fortunate and be from a landlord ownership, like one of the McClellans was in Gorham. Or you might be like the most of us and be of the tenant class that was paying rent, like one of the McClellans was in Gorham, who happened to marry each other. The stories abound, but the basic answer to your question is that mix of anti-religious oppression and land ownership potential was a push-pull to bring these landlords across into Ulster and fill the void that was left. There had been a civil war in Ireland, okay, just recently. And the results of the Civil War was that all the clan chiefs in Ulster fled to France and never came back, which left a power vacuum. James did not want to see that power vacuum taken up by anybody that might challenge him. So he moved the Scots across the border. By 1718, you had Queen Anne on the throne, okay? She passed a bunch of laws that were against Presbyterianism. You couldn't hold public office, you couldn't get married, you couldn't do this, you couldn't do that, you couldn't do no public schools. Same old, different location, okay? So you had the push starting to take place. You had a series of crop failures, you had disease, you had rent racking going on. Absentee landlords were demanding more money for their rent every 10 years. And you were getting letters from America saying, oh, I'll give you 100 acres if you just come over and settle it and stay on it, don't move. I'll give it to you. You won't owe any rent. It'll be yours free and clear title. You'll be a landlord instead of a tenant. Sounded pretty good, okay? It was a deal that they made. They made willingly. And when they got here and they got settled and they got their home built and they'd been there 2 or 3 generations, and then all of a sudden the sheriff from Massachusetts shows up and says, you got to get off this land because the proprietor owns it. That didn't go down too good. So you had 100 years of backcountry warfare with white Indians and the Massachusetts proprietors' agents. I like to tell people the reason that John Adams became president and that we won the American Revolution is because the proprietors of Massachusetts sent John Adams up to represent. John Adams was hired to represent the settlers in Maine on the Kennebec River versus the proprietors, and he won. So when Adams got back to Massachusetts, the proprietors put him on retainer so that he couldn't work for the settlers again. Because he was on retainer and had a good income now, he could afford to dabble in politics. dabbling in politics led to him becoming president and the American Revolution being won. So because of some stubborn Scots on the Kennebec River, da-da, 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 da-da. Does that answer your question? Yes, right here.
I just wondered if you have published a book, and if you haven't, would you kindly?
I have contributed largely to the book I just showed you called Reflections 1718 to 2018. And I also wrote the book on the Means Massacre story and background that are out here. And I also wrote a story about surveying that's connected with Maine history as well. So they're all on the table out here. Yeah.
So you've obviously done a lot of research, and I'm curious to know a little bit more about your process of learning all of this wonderful history.
Well, I can't take credit for much of it because what I did was I identified what I thought was a problem. That Maine has a rich history that's never been written, okay? And how are you going to write it? Well, what I did was started a website that said, I've got this story and this story and this story, what have you got? You send me your story, I'll send you my story, and we'll all share each other's stories, right? So that started the ball rolling, and immediately I got a response from the north of Ireland, from people over there saying, well, what's this all about? We know about New Hampshire, we know about Pennsylvania and the Great Wagon Road. Nobody over here knows anything about Maine. And I said, that's the problem. That's the problem. Well, I tell you, they know about us now. We've done programs over there. We've done programs all the way from South Georgia University to Scotland. And it's been very rewarding. Anybody else? Holly? No? Yep.
What was the relationship between James and Jacob Anderson?
His father and son. James Anderson was the father. Jacob was the son.
Jacob was the son.
James and Anna were the original couple to Flying Point and settled what we now call Lower Flying Point. Jacob, his oldest son, was born in Ireland, moved here when he was probably less than 6 years old, grew up and built the house north of the Lower Flying Point at that garrison house that we're now digging up. He had 4 younger brothers and sisters that died within 3 weeks of each other from throat distemper. James and Anna went on to have more children. Jacob became the patriarch of that. His younger brothers and sisters were like another generation in age difference. He made sure he bought land, he made sure he set them up, he made sure every one of them had a house, and it was amazing, the networking that went on among those families to make sure all the children and grandchildren had a successful footprint in the New World. Jacob Anderson was a heck of a guy. Heck of a guy. I noticed that they call this the Anderson Room. I wonder if it's the same family. I bet it is. Anybody else? Holly?
Yeah, John, could you speak to what we see in the American Revolution, where the Scots tend to be on the British side and the Scots-Irish Patriots? And I'd just love to hear your take on that. I mean, one thing that we could focus on is that Henry Mowat is Scottish, and
Yeah.
he is at the flashpoint with Samuel Thompson.
So I mentioned 1745, 1746 was the Scottish Rebellion, right? And that ended at Culloden, which was the last battle on British soil. And it did not go well for the Scots, unfortunately. But you had 2 choices basically after that battle if you were a Highlander. You could join the British Army. You could be executed. Or you could waste away in a prison hulk on a base, floating on the bay in an old hulk. Prison hulk. They weren't great choices. Many of the Highlanders joined the British Army and ended up fighting their own kin in America. There's a pretty well-defined scene of that in one of Diana Gabaldon's stories about cousins and brothers facing each other in North Carolina during the Revolution.
So this distinction is Highlanders versus local?
No, it's not. The distinction is, what do we do about it? A choice was made, okay? They could, if they had chose not to join the British Navy and managed to escape to the New World, and many of them did, they likely became patriots. But if they joined the British Army, they were fighting for the British Army and when fighting against Highlanders. It wasn't the distinction of the culture so much as it was the actual happenings that took place for these prisoners. Yeah. Yep.
So there were also Scots and Irish and French who came from Canada, and there were 2 battalions that fought in the American Revolution, and they were called Congress's Own because they weren't associated with any state. Have you seen connections?
I have not, but I would bet you dollars to donuts that there are some. It's amazing how interconnected these people were. It's not that big an area. You know, you stand in Northern Ireland, it's only 22 miles across the channel to Scotland, and in fact, Ulster Plantation in the Western Isles and Western Scotland were all one kingdom for centuries called Dalriada. So their history predates the modern history as being a interconnected family unit from both sides of the water there. The Scottish chiefs that are buried in Antrim County on the coast are buried standing up facing Scotland. Think about it. Think about it. Anybody else? Yeah?
Could you comment on Black Watch plaid?
Yeah. Well, after the Battle of Culloden and the collapse of the Highlands, they built a system of highways up through the Highlands so that they wouldn't have to be, if they had to fight again, they'd have a way to move the army around instead of climbing mountains and hill and dale, which was always to the Scots' advantage. But the Black Watch was created at the fort there, just east of Inverness, to keep a guard of the Scottish Highlands and make sure that there was never another rising. And the plaid created for those Scots that served in that capacity was the black plaid that you refer to.
So in a sense, it's the plaid of the Army of Occupation.
It's exactly what it was. Yeah.
So I really shouldn't wear any of the three.
A lot of people do.
Depends on your leaning.
A lot of people do, but I don't. Others? Yeah. I've used up my time and then some.
Well, thank you so much, John. I learned so much.